312 years is a long time to remember the sound of bones breaking beneath your hands. Kaelin Ironheart stood alone on the watchtower of Frosthold Castle, his massive frame silhouetted against the winter moon. The wind cut through the mountains like a blade, carrying with it the scent of pine and frozen earth. But he felt nothing. He had stopped feeling the cold 2 centuries ago, on a night much like this one, when he had wrapped his hands around the throat of the woman he loved and squeezed until the light left her eyes. Tonight marked 200 years since that moment. The Alpha King of the Northern Frost Pack looked out over his kingdom, watching the snow fall in sheets across the vast territories he had protected for 3 centuries. Below him, the castle sprawled like a sleeping giant, its ancient stones holding secrets that would make lesser men weep. Beyond the walls, thousands of his people slept in their homes, trusting their king to keep them safe from the darkness that always lurked at the edges of their world. They did not know that their king was the darkest thing among them. Kaelin lifted his face to the sky and closed his eyes. The moon was full tonight, fat and silver, casting shadows that seemed to move with purpose across the frozen landscape. In his younger years, he would have run beneath such a moon, his wolf form tearing through the forest with wild abandon. Now he simply stood and watched, a statue of flesh and bone, waiting for nothing and expecting less. His hair had begun to show silver at the temples, not from age, for wolves aged slowly, but from the weight of memory. Each strand of gray was a life he had taken, a decision that haunted him, a moment he could never reclaim. The scars that crossed his face and chest told stories he never spoke aloud. The emptiness in his golden eyes spoke of something worse than death. He had learned long ago that there were fates more terrible than dying. Below, in the warmth of the castle, his advisors would be sleeping. General Marcus Stone, his oldest friend and most trusted commander, would be dreaming of battles long past. The servants would be resting in their quarters, preparing for another day of service to a king who barely noticed their existence. Lady Cordelia Frostborn would be scheming in her chambers, plotting ways to claim a position beside the throne that Kaelin had no intention of filling. They all wanted something from him. They always did. The wind shifted, and Kaelin opened his eyes. Something was different tonight. The air carried a scent he did not recognize, something beneath the snow and the pine, something that made the wolf inside him stir for the first time in 200 years. He dismissed it as imagination. The anniversary always played tricks on his mind, bringing memories that felt more real than the present. He could still see Serena's face if he closed his eyes, still hear her voice begging him to end her suffering. She had not been born special, not marked by prophecy or ancient bloodlines. She had been an ordinary Omega who had loved him completely, who had stumbled upon secrets that should have remained buried, and who had paid the ultimate price for her curiosity. He could still feel the moment when her heart stopped beating, when the monster she had become finally found peace. What he could never forget was the look in her brother's eyes when Varen discovered what Kaelin had done. The Alpha King turned from the tower railing and began the long descent through the castle. His boots echoed against the stone steps, each footfall a reminder that he was still alive, still walking, still carrying the burden of a kingdom that needed him, whether he wanted to be needed or not. He had considered stepping down 1,000 times. He had considered walking into the wilderness and never returning. He had considered finding Varen and letting the man have his revenge, but duty held him in place, as it always had, chaining him to a throne he had never wanted and a crown that felt heavier with each passing year. 312 years. That was how long he had lived. 200 years. That was how long he had been dead inside. The castle corridors were empty at this hour, lit only by the flickering torches that lined the walls. Kaelin moved through them like a ghost, his presence barely disturbing the air. He had learned to walk silently out of necessity, though he could no longer remember why it had once seemed important. He was nearly to his chambers when General Marcus appeared at the end of the hallway, his weathered face tight with concern. The old warrior was 65 by wolf reckoning, though he looked a decade younger. His gray hair was cropped short in military fashion, and his eyes held the sharpness of a man who had survived more battles than he could count. Something is wrong, Kaelin thought, reading the tension in his friend's shoulders. Marcus bowed his head briefly before speaking. "Forgive the intrusion at this hour, Your Majesty. We have received reports from the eastern border." "An attack?" "Something stranger." Marcus fell into step beside his king, his voice low.
Shadowmere forces crossed into our territory 3 hours ago. They engaged our patrol, killed 2 of our wolves, then retreated before reinforcements could arrive.
Kaelin stopped walking. They retreated? Without taking anything. Without pressing their advantage. It was almost as if they were searching for something rather than seeking battle. The scent on the wind returned to Kaelin's memory, teasing at the edges of his consciousness. Something was happening tonight, something that went beyond the usual border skirmishes with Varen's pack. He could feel it in his bones, in the ancient instincts that had kept him alive for 3 centuries.
"Double the patrols," he ordered. "I want eyes on every approach to the castle, and send word to our scouts in Shadowmere territory. I want to know what Varen is planning."
Marcus nodded, but hesitation flickered across his face. "There is something else, Your Majesty. The scouts reported seeing something in the mountains, a figure moving through the blizzard, heading toward our borders. They lost sight of it in the storm."
"A spy?"
"Perhaps. Or perhaps something else entirely." Marcus met his king's eyes. "The men are calling it an omen. They say nothing mortal could survive in that storm." Kaelin thought of this prophecy that had haunted the wolf packs for 500 years. The words that every alpha knew by heart. The last pure blood will bring either peace or destruction. For 5 centuries, the packs had hunted for the pure blood Omega, the rarest of their kind, whose bloodline could produce the true alpha and end the endless wars between territories. Most believed the purebloods had died out generations ago. Kaelin had stopped believing in prophecies altogether. Serena had not been a pureblood, had possessed no special powers or ancient bloodlines, yet she had died just the same. Destiny was a lie that powerful men told themselves to justify their cruelty. "I will patrol the northern pass myself," he said. "If there is something out there, I will find it." Marcus opened his mouth to protest, then thought better of it. He had served Kaelin long enough to know when argument was futile. "At least take a guard with you." "I need no guard." Kaelin was already moving toward the castle gates. "If I am not back by dawn, assume command of the defenses." He did not wait for a response. The wolf inside him was awake now, pacing with an urgency he had not felt in 2 centuries. Something was calling to him through the storm, something that made his dead heart remember what it felt like to beat. The blizzard hit him the moment he stepped beyond the castle walls, a wall of white that would have driven lesser creatures back to shelter. Kaelin welcomed it. He shifted as he walked, his body transforming with the ease of centuries of practice, his human form giving way to something larger, darker, more primal. The wolf that emerged was massive, black as midnight, except for the silver that streaked his muzzle and chest. His eyes glowed amber in the darkness, cutting through the snow like twin flames. He moved through the storm as if it were nothing more than a gentle breeze, his paws finding purchase on the frozen ground with supernatural certainty. The scent grew stronger as he climbed into the mountains. Blood. That was the first thing he recognized, sharp and metallic beneath the overwhelming cold. But there was something else, something that made him run faster, push harder, climb higher into the howling darkness. It was the scent of power, ancient and pure and desperately afraid. He found her at the edge of a frozen stream, her small body curled against a rock that offered no shelter from the wind. She was barely conscious, her skin pale as the snow that surrounded her, her white hair spread around her head like a halo of ice. Blood stained the torn fabric of her clothing, and even from a distance, Kaelin could see the marks of torture on her exposed flesh. Someone had hurt her. Someone had hurt her badly and then left her to die. The wolf approached slowly, every instinct screaming warnings that he could not identify. She was Omega. He could smell that much, the distinctive sweetness that marked her kind. But there was something else beneath the Omega scent, something older and more powerful, something that made his wolf want to both protect and flee. She opened her eyes as he drew near, and Kaelin felt the world shift beneath his paws. Her eyes were gray, not the dull gray of storm clouds, but the luminous silver gray of moonlight on fresh snow. They held fear and defiance in equal measure, and something else that he could not name, something that reached inside him and touched the part of his soul he had thought long dead, the mate bond. He recognized it even as he denied it. The instant, undeniable connection that wolves spent their entire lives searching for, the thread of destiny that bound 2 souls together across any distance, through any obstacle. After 200 years of emptiness, fate had delivered his true mate, and she was dying in front of him.
Kalen shifted back to human form, ignoring the cold that bit into his skin. He knelt beside her, his massive frame blocking the worst of the wind, and reached out to touch her face. Her skin was ice cold, but she flinched at his contact, her eyes widening with recognition. "Alpha," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Please, no more." She thought he was there to hurt her. The realization struck him like a physical blow. Whoever had done this to her, they had been alphas. They had used their power to break her, to torture her, to drive her into this storm to die. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, his voice rough with emotions he could not identify. "I am Kalen Ironheart, Alpha King of Northern Frost. You are safe now." She laughed at that, a broken sound that turned into a cough. Blood flecked her lips, bright against her pale skin. "Safe. There is no safe. They will find me. They always find me." Who did this to you?" But she was already slipping away, her eyes closing, her breathing growing shallow. Kalen made his decision in the space of a heartbeat. He gathered her into his arms, cradling her against his chest, and began the long run back to the castle. He could leave her here. That thought whispered through his mind as he carried her through the storm. He could let her die, and whatever she represented would die with her. No complications, no consequences, no risk of caring for someone only to lose them again. But he had killed enough innocent people for one lifetime. The castle erupted into chaos when he arrived. Servants scattered at the sight of their king, bare-chested and snow-covered, carrying an unconscious woman in his arms. Guards shouted questions he did not answer. Helena Blackthorne, the senior attendant who had served the royal household for decades, appeared at his side without being summoned, her face pale but her hands steady. "Take her to the guest chambers," Kalen ordered. "Send for the healers. She is not to be left alone." Helena nodded and began giving orders of her own, her voice cutting through the confusion with practiced authority. But Kalen noticed something strange in the older woman's expression when she looked at the unconscious girl. Her hands trembled slightly as she helped transfer the girl to a stretcher. Her eyes held a recognition that made no sense. He filed the observation away for later consideration. The healers worked through the night, and Kalen waited outside the chamber doors, refusing all suggestions that he rest or attend to other matters. General Marcus brought him a report on the border situation, which he barely acknowledged. Lady Cordelia attempted to engage him in conversation, which he ignored entirely. Servants offered food and drink, which he waved away. He did not understand why he was waiting. The girl was a stranger, Omega, and therefore theoretically beneath his notice in the rigid hierarchy of pack society. The mate bond was a biological imperative, nothing more. He had lived without a mate for 3 centuries. He could continue to do so, but he could not make himself leave. Dawn came slowly, gray light seeping through the castle windows like reluctant hope. Helena emerged from the chamber, her face showing the exhaustion of a sleepless night, and Kalen was on his feet before she could speak. "She will live," Helena said. "The wounds were severe, but she is strong, stronger than she should be, given what she endured." "What happened to her?" Helena hesitated, and Kalen saw that strange recognition flicker through her eyes again. "She bears the marks of Shadowmere torture. She was being held prisoner, it seems, and escaped during the border attack. The storm likely saved her life. Whoever was hunting her could not track her through the blizzard." Shadowmere. The name tasted like poison. Varen's pack, Varen's cruelty. 200 years, and the man's hatred still reached out to destroy everything Kalen might have loved. But how had Varen known about this girl? And why would he care about a lone Omega? Unless she was not merely an Omega. Kalen pushed past Helena and entered the chamber. The girl lay on the massive bed, looking impossibly small among the silk sheets and fur blankets. Someone had cleaned the blood from her face, revealing delicate features that spoke of both fragility and determination. Her white hair spread across the pillow like spilled moonlight, and on her left wrist, partially hidden by bandages, he saw the edge of a scar, not a wound, but a brand, the symbol that Shadowmere used to mark its prisoners. She had been their property. They had claimed her, used her, and somehow she had escaped. The girl's eyes opened, and once again that silver-gray gaze struck him like lightning. This time, however, there was no fear in her expression, only cold, measured assessment. "You saved me," she said. Her voice was stronger than it had been in the mountains, though still rough from her ordeal. "Why?" Kalen found himself without an answer. He could not tell her about the mate bond, not when he barely understood it himself. He could not explain the impulse that had driven him to carry her through the storm when logic dictated he should have left her to die. "Because you needed saving," he said finally. "Is that not reason enough?" She laughed again, that same broken sound from before. "In my experience, no one does anything without reason, especially alphas, especially kings." "Then perhaps your experience has been with the wrong alphas and the wrong kings." Something flickered in her eyes at that. Surprise, perhaps, or the first tentative spark of something that might someday become trust. "My name is Alara," she said. "Alara Thornwood, though I doubt that name means anything to you." "It does not," Kaelin admitted. "Should it?" "No." She turned her face away, looking toward the window where the gray dawn light was slowly brightening. "It should not mean anything to anyone. That is the point. That is what I have spent my entire life trying to ensure." There was a story there, buried beneath the exhaustion and the pain. Kaelin could sense it, could feel the weight of secrets pressing against her words. But he had learned long ago that secrets revealed themselves in their own time, and pushing too hard only drove them deeper underground. "You are safe here," he said instead, "for as long as you wish to stay. No one will harm you in my house." Alara met his eyes again, and this time her gaze was sharp, searching. "Why? Why would an Alpha King offer sanctuary to a worthless Omega? What do you want from me?" It was a fair question. In her position, he would have asked the same. "I want nothing from you," Kaelin answered honestly, "except perhaps an answer to a single question." She tensed, waiting. "What are you running from, Alara Thornwood? What is so terrible that you would brave a blizzard that should have killed you rather than face it?" For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of the wind outside the windows and the distant murmur of the waking castle. Then she closed her eyes and spoke two words that changed everything. The prophecy. 3 months passed like water through fingers, too fast to grasp and too slow to bear. Alara recovered from her injuries with a speed that surprised even the healers, her body mending as if driven by some inner force that refused to be denied. Within 2 weeks, she was walking the castle corridors. Within a month, she had requested permission to work in the Great Library, preferring useful occupation to idle recovery. Kaelin granted her request, though he assigned Helena to watch over her. He told himself it was for the girl's protection, but he knew the truth was more complicated. He wanted to understand her. He wanted to know what secrets lay behind those silver-gray eyes. He wanted to know why the mate bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, even though neither of them acknowledged its existence. The first month taught him that Alara was not what he had expected. She did not simper or flatter, did not seek his favor through feminine wiles, did not behave like any Omega he had ever encountered. She was sharp-tongued and observant, quick to notice details that others overlooked, and utterly unimpressed by his rank or power. He found her in the library one evening, surrounded by stacks of books on military strategy and political theory. She looked up at his approach, neither startled nor pleased, simply acknowledging his presence with a brief nod before returning to her reading. "Most Omegas prefer poetry and romance," he observed, studying the titles of the volumes she had collected. "Most Omegas have not spent their lives being hunted like animals." Alara did not look up from her page. "I find it useful to understand how predators think." "And do these books help you understand?" "They help me understand that predators often underestimate their prey." Now she did look up, meeting his eyes with that sharp silver gaze. "A lesson you might remember, Your Majesty, when you wonder why I read what I read." Kaelin felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as admiration. "You think I underestimate you?" "I think everyone underestimates me. It is the nature of being Omega. We are seen as weak, dependent, valuable only for what we can provide to alphas." Her voice held no bitterness, only the flat acceptance of truth. "I learned long ago to use that assumption as a weapon." "And has it served you well?" "I am alive," she said simply. "In my world, that counts as success." The second month brought complications. Kaelin had hoped to keep Alara's presence quiet, at least until he understood more about her situation and the forces that had driven her to flee. But secrets were impossible to maintain in a castle full of curious wolves, and soon the nobility was buzzing with speculation about the mysterious Omega who had captured their king's attention. Lady Cordelia was the first to make her displeasure known. She cornered Alara at a formal dinner, her beautiful face twisted with barely concealed contempt, her voice carrying just far enough for the surrounding nobles to hear. "I hear you are from the border territories," Cordelia said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "How delightful that our king has taken in another stray, though I wonder what services you provide that earned such generosity." The implication was clear and deliberately cruel. Kaelin began to rise from his seat, prepared to intervene, but Alara's response stopped him cold. "I provide nothing," Alara said, her voice perfectly calm. "Unlike some, I do not need to barter my body for position. As for being a stray, I find that strays often have a clearer view of the world than those who have never ventured beyond their kennels." A ripple of shocked murmurs passed through the assembled nobles. Cordelia's face flushed with anger. "You dare speak to me that way? Do you know who I am?" Alara smiled, and for the first time, Kaelin saw the steel beneath her quiet exterior. "I know exactly who you are, Lady Cordelia. You are the woman who has spent 10 years trying to become queen and failing. You are the woman who mistakes cruelty for power and position for worth. And you are the woman who believes that attacking those you perceive as weaker will make you stronger." She stood, her small frame somehow commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "But you have made a mistake. I am not weak. I have survived things that would break you in an instant, and I do not need the king's protection to handle someone whose greatest weapon is gossip." The silence that followed was absolute. Cordelia's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. The nobles stared with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed delight. And Kaelin, for the first time in 200 years, had to fight to suppress a smile. That night, after this dinner had ended and the guests had departed, Kaelin found Alara on one of the castle balconies, looking out at the moonlit mountains. She did not turn when he approached, though he knew she was aware of his presence. "That was unwise," he said, standing beside her at the railing. "Cordelia has powerful allies. She will not forget that humiliation." "I know." Alara's voice was tired but unrepentant. "But I have spent my entire life being careful, being invisible, being everything that everyone expected me to be. And where did it get me? Tortured in a Shadowmere dungeon, waiting for death." She turned to face him, and in the moonlight, her silver eyes seemed to glow. "I am done hiding. I am done letting people like her make me feel worthless. If that makes me unwise, then I will be unwise. At least I will be myself." Kaelin understood then that he had been wrong about her. She was not damaged or broken by her experiences. She was forged by them, hardened into something stronger and more resilient than steel. The girl he had found dying in the snow had been a chrysalis. The woman standing before him now was what had emerged. "You are not worthless," he said quietly. "You never were." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that went deeper than words. The mate bond pulsed with warmth, and for the first time Kaelin allowed himself to acknowledge what he had been fighting to deny. He was falling in love with her. The 3rd month brought truth. It began with a letter from one of his spies in Shadowmere territory, delivered by Raven in the dead of night. The message was brief but devastating. Lord Varen Ashford had not given up his search for the escaped prisoner. He had mobilized half his forces to find her, and he was offering a reward that would make any wolf rich beyond imagination. 10,000 gold pieces for the girl's return, alive. Kaelin burned the letter and told no one of its contents, but he knew that secrets this valuable had a way of spreading, and it would not be long before someone in Northern Frost was tempted by Varen's offer. He needed answers. He needed to understand what made Alara so valuable to his oldest enemy. That night, after the castle had gone quiet, he went to her chambers. She was awake, as he had somehow known she would be, sitting by the window with a single candle burning on the table beside her. She looked up when he entered, and in her eyes he saw that she had been expecting him. "You know," she said, it was not a question. "I know that Varen wants you badly enough to bankrupt his treasury. I know that Shadowmere tortured you for information you refused to give. I know that you carry a secret so dangerous that you would rather die than reveal it." Kaelin crossed the room and sat across from her, close enough to touch, but keeping his hands carefully still. "What I do not know is why." Alara was silent for a long moment. Then she reached up and pulled aside the collar of her nightgown, revealing the skin above her heart. Kaelin had seen many things in his 3 centuries of life. He had witnessed battles that stained rivers red with blood, had faced monsters that would haunt the nightmares of ordinary men, had killed his own mate with his bare hands. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of the mark on Alara's chest. It was the symbol of the pure blood, the ancient sign that had not been seen in the wolf territories for 500 years, the mark that identified the rarest and most powerful of all Omegas, the bloodline that could give birth to the true Alpha and change the fate of every pack in existence. "Now you understand," Alara said, her voice barely a whisper. "Now you know why they want me, why they have always wanted me. I am the last Kaelin, the last pure blood, the end of a line that stretches back to the beginning of our kind." Kaelin could not speak, could not think. The implications crashed through his mind like waves against a cliff, each one revealing new depths of danger and possibility. The prophecy was real. The pure blood lived, and she had been delivered to him by fate or chance or whatever force governed the universe. "Does anyone else know?" he asked finally. "Helena knows. She has known since the first night, when she saw the mark while treating my wounds." Alara's eyes held something that might have been fear. "She did not tell you. She did not tell anyone. I do not know why, but she kept my secret." Helena, the older woman who had served the household for decades, whose past before arriving at Frosthold remained mysteriously blank, whose reaction to Alara's presence had been so strangely emotional. Another piece of a puzzle he was only beginning to understand. "The prophecy says the pure blood will bring peace or destruction," Kaelin said slowly. "Which do you intend?" Alara laughed softly, but there was no humor in the sound. "I intend to survive. Everything else is beyond my control. I did not ask to be born what I am. I did not ask for this mark or this burden or this fate. All I have ever wanted is to be left alone, to live a life of my own choosing, free from those who would use me as a tool or a weapon. And yet you came here, to the castle of an Alpha King, the one place where your power would be most valuable and most dangerous. I did not choose to come here. The storm brought me. You brought me." Her voice caught slightly. "But I will not lie to you, Kaelin. These past 3 months, I have wondered if perhaps the storm knew what it was doing, if perhaps there was a reason I ended up here with you, instead of dying in the snow as I should have." The mate bond flared between them, undeniable now, impossible to ignore. Kaelin felt it pulling him toward her, urging him to close the distance, to claim her, to make real what fate had already decreed. But he had learned the cost of following instinct without thought. He had killed the last woman he loved because he acted without understanding. He would not make that mistake again. "You are safe here," he said, the same words he had spoken on the first day. But now they carried a different weight. "Not because of what you are, but because of who you are. I do not care about prophecies or purebloods or the politics of the wolf territories. I care that you are a person who has suffered too much and deserves a chance at peace." Alara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you are brave and clever and unwilling to let the world break you. I know you challenge me in ways no one has dared in centuries. I know that when I am near you, I feel something I thought I had lost forever." He reached out and took her hand, the first time he had touched her since carrying her through the storm. Her skin was warm now, alive, trembling slightly beneath his fingers. "I will not force anything," he continued. "I will not claim you or pressure you or expect anything you are not ready to give. But I want you to know that whatever comes, whatever happens with Varen or the prophecy or the fate of the territories, you will not face it alone. Not anymore." Alara stared at him for a long moment, her silver eyes searching his face for deception and finding none. Then she did something that surprised them both. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his cheek, a gentle brush of warmth that lasted only a heartbeat, but felt like eternity. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." They sat together in the candlelight until dawn began to lighten the sky, not speaking, not needing to speak. The mate bond hummed between them, patient and sure, waiting for them to be ready for what came next. Neither of them knew that their time was running out. The first signs of the awakening began 3 days later. Alara woke before dawn, her body burning with a fever that no cold cloth could ease. Her skin felt hypersensitive, every thread of her nightgown an irritation, every brush of air a torment. She stumbled from her bed to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass, trying to understand what was happening to her. Then the visions started. They came like lightning flashes, images of people she did not know, places she had never been, moments from lives that were not her own. A woman with silver hair dying in childbirth, a man with golden eyes standing over a battlefield of corpses, children running through forests that no longer existed, lovers embracing beneath moons that had set centuries ago. The memories of the purebloods who had come before, the inheritance that every last carrier of the bloodline received, whether they wanted it or not. The awakening had begun. Helena found her on the floor of her chamber, curled into a ball, whimpering with the effort of containing the flood of images that threatened to drown her consciousness. The older woman's face went white with recognition and fear. "How long?" Helena demanded, kneeling beside her. "How long have the visions been coming?" "Minutes. Hours. I do not know." Alara gripped Helena's arm with desperate strength. "What is happening to me?" Helena helped her back to bed, her movements gentle, but her expression grave. "The awakening, the inheritance of the pure blood. Every omega of our line goes through this when they reach full maturity. The memories of all who came before will pass into you, their knowledge, their experiences, their power. But the process is dangerous. Without an anchor to hold you to the present, you risk losing yourself in the past. An anchor? Someone you trust completely, someone whose presence can keep you grounded while the memories flow through you." Helena's voice caught. "Your father was my anchor when I went through my own awakening. Without him, I would have been lost." The words took a moment to penetrate Alara's fever-fogged mind. Then the meaning struck her with the force of a blow. "Your father, my anchor." Helena was not just a servant who had kept her secret. Helena was something far more impossible. "You are like me," Alara breathed. "You are pure blood." "I was," Helena said quietly. "Before I gave birth to you. The bloodline passes to the child, leaving the mother as ordinary omega. It is why there can only ever be one pure blood at a time. It is why I had to give you up, to hide you, to protect you from those who would use you as they tried to use me." The room seemed to spin around Alara. 23 years of believing she was abandoned, unwanted, worthless. 23 years of running and hiding and never understanding why she was different. And now, in the grip of a transformation that might kill her, she learned that she had a mother, that she had never been alone. "You left me," she said, and the words came out as accusation rather than question. "I saved you." Tears streamed down Helena's weathered face. "Varen discovered what I was. He wanted to breed the pure bloodline, to create an army of true alphas under his control. I escaped before you were born, killed 12 of his wolves to protect us, and then I left you where he could not find you. I have searched for you every day since, every single day, for 23 years. Alara wanted to be angry. She wanted to scream and rage at the woman who had abandoned her to a life of suffering. But looking at Helena's face, seeing the decades of grief and guilt carved into every line, she found that she could not. She understood sacrifice. She understood doing terrible things for love. "I need an anchor," she said instead, pushing aside the emotional maelstrom for later consideration. "For the awakening." "Yes, and I cannot serve. We are too newly reunited. The bond is not strong enough." Helena's eyes moved to the door. "But there is someone whose bond with you is already powerful, someone you trust, even if you have not admitted it to yourself. Kaylin, the mate bond, the connection that had been building between them for 3 months." "No." Alara shook her head weakly. "I cannot ask that of him. The awakening will last days. He will see everything, every memory, every secret, every moment of my life. I cannot be that vulnerable to anyone." "Then you will die." Helena's voice was brutal in its honesty. "Or worse, you will lose yourself, become a vessel for 500 years of memories with no identity of your own. I have seen it happen, Alara. It is a fate worse than death." Another wave of visions crashed through Alara's mind, and she cried out, clutching her head. A battle from 3 centuries ago, a wedding in a castle that had crumbled to dust, a child taking its first steps in a world that no longer existed. She was drowning. She was losing herself. "Send for him," she gasped. "Send for the king." Helena was already moving toward the door. "Hold on," she said over her shoulder. "Just hold on a little longer." The door closed, and Alara was alone with the memories of the dead. She did not know how long she waited. Time had lost meaning, seconds stretching into years, minutes collapsing into heartbeats. The visions came faster now, more intense, threatening to wash away everything that made her who she was. Then the door opened and Kaylin was there. He crossed the room in 3 strides and gathered her into his arms, pressing her against his chest, his warmth cutting through the chaos like a beacon through fog. His presence was immediate and overwhelming, the mate bond blazing to life between them, anchoring her to the present even as the past threatened to pull her under. "I am here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have you. I am not going anywhere." Ilara clung to him like a drowning woman clutching a lifeline. The visions continued to come, but they were manageable now, filtered through the connection between them, no longer threatening to consume her entirely. "You will see everything," she warned him, "every memory that passes through me, every secret of 500 years. I know. You might hate me afterward, you might hate yourself." Kaelin pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, and in his gaze she saw nothing but certainty. "I have lived 300 years with my own hatreds and regrets. Whatever secrets the past holds, they cannot be worse than what I already carry, and nothing I learn will change what I feel for you." He kissed her then, not with passion but with promise, a seal on words that could not be taken back, a commitment that would bind them together through whatever came next. The awakening continued, and together they faced the darkness. Far to the south, Lord Varen received word that the pure blood had entered her transformation. He smiled, cold and cruel, and began mobilizing his forces. The trap was set, the pieces were in motion, and the game that would determine the fate of every wolf in the territories was about to begin. The memories came like a river breaking through a dam, relentless and overwhelming, threatening to sweep away everything that made Ilara who she was. Each wave brought new faces, new voices, new lives that had ended centuries before she was born. They pressed against the walls of her consciousness, demanding entrance, demanding acknowledgement, demanding to be remembered by the last of their kind. Ilara fought to maintain herself against the onslaught. She had always known who she was, even when the world told her she was nothing. A rogue Omega, a wanderer, a survivor. But now those certainties seemed fragile, paper-thin against the weight of 500 years of accumulated identity. She could feel herself dissolving, becoming less Ilara and more vessel, less individual and more repository for the dead. She saw births and deaths, loves and losses, triumphs and tragedies stretching back 500 years. She felt the joy of a pure-blood mother holding her newborn child, felt the agony of that same mother dying to protect her offspring from hunters. She witnessed coronations and assassinations, treaties signed and broken, alliances forged in blood and shattered by betrayal. Through it all, Kaelin held her, his arms wrapped around her like armor, his presence a lighthouse in the storm of centuries. The mate bond between them blazed with golden light, visible to her inner eye, even as the memories threatened to blind her to everything else. She clung to that light, to him, letting his strength anchor her while the inheritance of her bloodline poured through her consciousness. When the visions became too intense, when she thought she might shatter into 1,000 pieces of borrowed memory, she focused on the sound of his heartbeat. Steady, strong, unchanging. A rhythm that belonged to the present, to this moment, to the man who had chosen to stand with her against the tide of history. She had never trusted anyone the way she trusted him. The realization struck her between waves of memory, a truth so fundamental that it cut through the chaos like a blade. She had come to him as a stranger, as a burden, as a problem to be solved, and he had given her shelter without demanding anything in return. He had given her choices when everyone else had only given her commands. That was why she had chosen him as her anchor. Not because of the mate bond, though that certainly helped. Not because he was powerful, though his power was undeniable. She had chosen him because he was the first person in her 23 years of life who had treated her like she mattered for herself, not for what she could provide. The first day passed in a blur of images and emotions that were not her own. Kaelin did not eat, did not sleep, did not move from her side except when absolutely necessary. Helena brought water and tried to coax food into both of them, but neither could manage more than a few sips, a few bites. The awakening demanded everything, leaving nothing for the mundane necessities of survival. General Marcus came twice to report on the border situation, his voice carrying through the door with urgent concern. The Shadowmere raiders had retreated, but scouts reported movement in the southern territories. Something was building, Marcus warned. Something that would not wait forever. Kaelin acknowledged the reports but did not leave. He sent orders through Marcus, delegated command to his trusted officers, did everything he could to manage a kingdom from the bedside of the woman who was fighting for her sanity. It was an impossible position, and Alara could feel through the mate bond how much it cost him to divide his attention. But he stayed. Through everything he stayed. By the second day, the memories had begun to organize themselves, settling into patterns that her mind could process without fragmenting. She still saw the visions, still felt the echoes of lives long ended, but they no longer threatened to drown her. Kaelin's presence had given her a foundation, a point of reference against which she could measure herself and remember who she was. "Tell me something," she whispered during a brief moment of clarity. Her voice was hoarse from crying out during the more intense visions, raw from the strain of containing 5 centuries of accumulated emotion. "Tell me something about yourself, something true." Kaelin shifted slightly, adjusting his hold on her without letting go. His own exhaustion showed in the lines around his eyes, in the way his usually impeccable composure had begun to fray at the edges. But his voice was steady when he spoke. "I was not always king. When I was young, barely a century old, I wanted nothing more than to explore the world beyond our territories. I dreamed of sailing across the great seas, of climbing mountains no wolf had ever climbed, of discovering wonders that no one had ever seen. What happened? My father died. My brothers were too young to rule, and I discovered that duty weighs more than dreams." He paused, and she felt the old grief move through him like a shadow. "I have never regretted my choice, but sometimes, on nights when the moon is full and the wind carries the scent of distant places, I wonder what my life might have been." Alara absorbed this, adding it to her understanding of the man who held her. So much of his life had been sacrifice, so much had been given up for the sake of others, and yet he remained, 3 centuries later, still carrying the burden he had never asked for. "When this is over," she said, "when the awakening is complete and whatever comes next has been faced, perhaps we could explore together, not across seas or up mountains, but within ourselves, learning who we might be if duty were not always first." Kaelin's arms tightened around her. "I would like that," he said quietly. "More than I can say." The second night brought memories that cut closer to the bone. Alara found herself pulled into a vision so vivid that for a moment she forgot it was not her own experience. She stood in a forest clearing, watching a young woman with hair the color of autumn leaves embrace a dark-haired man whose face she somehow recognized. The clearing was surrounded by ancient oaks, their branches forming a cathedral of leaves overhead, and the light that filtered through had a golden quality that seemed to belong to a different age entirely. The woman was Helena, 23 years younger, her face unlined by grief, her body swollen with pregnancy. Her hands rested on her belly with the protective instinct of all mothers, and her eyes held a joy so pure that it made Alara's heart ache. And the man holding her was not a stranger at all. He was one of the pure bloods from earlier visions, a guardian of the bloodline who had died protecting his family from those who hunted them. Alara's father. She was seeing her own father for the first time. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the silver-gray eyes that Alara had inherited, and a gentle smile that seemed at odds with the warrior's scars visible on his arms. He spoke to Helena in a voice too soft for Alara to hear, his hands cupping her face with a tenderness that transcended time. When he kissed her forehead, when he knelt to press his ear against her pregnant belly, Alara felt tears streaming down her face in the present, even as she witnessed the past. This was what she had been denied, this love, this safety, this belonging. Her parents had wanted her. They had loved each other and loved the child they were expecting. Whatever had happened after, whatever tragedy had separated them, this moment was real. The memory shifted, compressing time in the way that visions often did. Alara watched Helena flee through a burning forest, watched her kill wolves who tried to stop her, watched her give birth alone in a cave while enemies searched the mountainside. The contrast was jarring, brutal, a reminder that happiness in the wolf territories was always fragile. She saw her father die, cut down by Shadowmere assassins, while buying time for Helena to escape. She felt his last thought, transmitted through the pure blood connection that linked all of her kind. Protect them. Protect my family. She felt his love, fierce and unwavering even in death, a love that asked for nothing except that his sacrifice not be in vain. Then she saw Helena's flight, the desperate days and weeks that followed, the impossible choices her mother had been forced to make. She felt her mother's terror and determination, felt the desperate love that drove Helena to place her newborn daughter in a basket and leave her at the doorstep of a remote village, praying that obscurity would provide the protection she could not. And she felt Helena's heart shatter as she walked away, knowing she might never see her child again. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that seemed to tear the world apart. Helena had walked for miles before she allowed herself to collapse, before she let the sobs escape that she had been holding back. She had lain in the snow and screamed until her voice gave out, screamed for the daughter she had abandoned and the mate she had lost and the life that had been stolen from her. The vision faded, leaving Alara trembling in Kaylin's arms. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of sorrow alone. For the first time in her life, she understood. She had not been abandoned because she was unwanted. She had been hidden because she was too precious to lose. "My mother," she breathed, and the words felt strange on her tongue after 23 years of believing she had none. "She loved me. She has always loved me." Kaylin said nothing, simply holding her closer, giving her the space to process what she had learned. But through the mate bond, she felt his own emotion, a mixture of relief and sorrow, and something that might have been hope. Helena appeared in the doorway, drawn perhaps by some maternal instinct that transcended walls and doors. Her eyes met Alara's across the room, and in that look was everything the visions had shown: the love, the loss, the years of searching and waiting and praying. "You saw," Helena said. It was not a question. "I saw. I understand now." Alara reached out a hand, and Helena crossed the room to take it, sinking to her knees beside the bed. "I forgive you. I forgive everything." Helena wept then, the silent tears of a woman who had carried her grief for too long. And Alara wept with her, mother and daughter reunited at last, the bond between them healing wounds that had festered for more than 2 decades. Kaylin withdrew slightly, giving them privacy while remaining close enough to serve as anchor. His presence was a warmth at her back, a reminder that she was not alone, that she would never be alone again. The third day began with fire. Alara woke from a brief, exhausted sleep to find the awakening surging back with renewed intensity. The memories that came now were different from those before. They were sharper, more focused, carrying a weight of significance that made her spine straighten and her breath catch. These were not random recollections from anonymous ancestors. These were memories that the pure-blood essence had preserved deliberately, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. She saw the earliest purebloods, the first of her line, making pacts with forces older than the wolf packs themselves. She saw the origin of the prophecy, the words spoken by a dying oracle that had shaped 5 centuries of history. The true Alpha would come, the oracle had proclaimed, born of pure blood and forged in fire. And she began to see fragments of a memory she somehow knew was crucial, images of a woman with Kaylin's eyes and a man who could only be Lord Varon Ashford. They were younger in these fragments, unburdened by the hatred that would later consume them, and they moved through the world with the ease of people who had not yet learned how cruel fate could be. Serena. The memories were leading her toward Serena. But before she could follow the thread to its conclusion, the warning bells began to ring. The sound cut through the castle like a knife, harsh and urgent, shattering the quiet of the sick room. It was not the steady rhythm of a drill or the measured pace of a call to assembly. This was the frantic clanging of true emergency, of walls breached and enemies within the gates. Alara struggled to sit up, her body weak from days of the awakening. But Kaylin was already on his feet, his exhaustion falling away as battle instincts took over. In the space of a heartbeat, he transformed from the gentle anchor who had held her through her ordeal into the Alpha King, the ruler whose power had kept the Northern Frost Pack safe for 3 centuries. His eyes blazed amber gold, and his muscles coiled with barely restrained violence. "Stay here," he commanded, moving toward the door. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority, the tone that expected obedience, not because it demanded, but because it deserved. "Do not leave this room for any reason." "What is happening?" Before he could answer, General Marcus burst through the door, his weathered face pale with shock. Blood stained his armor, fresh and bright, and his sword was already drawn. The old warrior had fought beside Kaelin for decades, had faced enemies that would make ordinary men flee in terror, but Alara had never seen him look frightened before. "Your Majesty, we are under attack. Shadowmere forces have breached the outer walls. They came through a passage beneath the castle, one that should not exist, one that is not on any map or record. Someone opened the way for them from within. Betrayal." The word hung in the air, unspoken, but understood by everyone in the room. This was not a simple military assault. This was treachery from within their own ranks, a knife in the back from someone who had been trusted. Kaelin's expression hardened into something terrible, the face of a king who had been wounded too many times to be surprised by treachery, but who still felt each betrayal like a fresh cut. "How many?" 300 at least. More coming through the passage every minute. Our forces are engaging them in the lower corridors, but they fight like demons. They are not trying to hold territory or negotiate terms. Marcus's eyes flicked to Alara, then back to his king. They are making for the inner keep. They are making for her. The awakening surged through Alara again, and this time the visions showed her things that were not past, but present. The pure blood sight could pierce through walls and distance, could see what was happening throughout the castle, even while her body remained in the sick room. She saw Shadowmere wolves racing through castle corridors, their claws striking sparks from the stone floors, their eyes wild with battle fury. She saw bodies of northern frost guards lying in pools of blood, men and women who had given their lives to slow an enemy that could not be stopped. She saw a familiar figure standing at the center of the invasion, directing it with cold precision, his silver hair a banner in the torchlight. Lord Varon Ashford had come for her himself. Kaelin turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw the terrible choice he was being forced to make. Stay with her, keep her safe, fulfill the mate bond's primal demand to protect what was his above all else, and let his people die by the hundreds while he hid in a sick room. Or leave her, face the enemy, lead his forces against the invaders, and risk losing her to the very man who had destroyed his life 2 centuries ago. It was an impossible choice, a cruel choice, the kind of choice that broke men and shattered kingdoms. "Go," she said before he could speak. "Alara, your people need you. Your kingdom needs you. I will not be the reason innocents die." She forced strength into her voice that she did not feel. "Go, fight, win, and then come back to me." The conflict in his face was agonizing to witness. The mate bond screamed at him to stay, to protect, to guard what was his above all else. But duty pulled with equal force, the weight of 3 centuries of responsibility, the lives of thousands who depended on him. "I will return," he said finally, the words a vow. "Whatever happens, I will return to you." He kissed her then, fierce and desperate, pouring everything he felt into the contact. Then he was gone, racing after Marcus, the sounds of battle growing louder as the Shadowmere assault pressed deeper into the castle. Helena moved to secure the door, her aged body suddenly seeming younger, stronger, the echo of the warrior she had once been rising to the surface. She had been a killer once, before she became a mother, before she became a servant hiding in plain sight. That killer had never truly died, only slept, and now she awakened with savage purpose. "We must barricade ourselves inside. If Varon reaches this room before Kaelin can return, we will have to fight. Can we win?" Helena's smile was grim. "We can survive. Sometimes that is all that matters." The door exploded inward before she could finish. The wood shattered into 1,000 splinters, flying across the room like wooden daggers. Helena threw herself in front of Alara, taking several pieces in her back and shoulders, her cry of pain lost in the thunder of the destruction. When the dust settled, when the ringing in Alara's ears faded enough for her to hear, she saw Lady Cordelia Frostborn stepping through the shattered frame. The noblewoman looked nothing like the jealous schemer who had haunted the castle for years. Gone was the pretense of wounded dignity. In its place was something harder, colder, a face that had been hiding behind beauty and tears while waiting for exactly this moment. Behind her came 6 Shadowmere wolves, their eyes gleaming with malice, their claws already extended for killing. "Did you truly think you could hide her forever?" Cordelia asked, her voice dripping with contempt. "Did you think your pathetic king could protect her from those who have been waiting generations for this moment?" Helena placed herself between Cordelia and Alara, her stance shifting into something that Alara recognized from the memories of warriors past. It was the position of a fighter who expected to die but intended to take as many enemies with her as possible. Blood ran from the wounds in her back, but her hands were steady and her eyes were clear. "Cordelia, you treasonous bitch. I always knew there was rot beneath your pretty surface. All those years playing the victim, pretending to pine for a king who would never want you. I should have slit your throat in your sleep." "Rot?" Cordelia laughed, and the sound was ugly. "I call it patience. Do you know how long I have waited for this moment? 10 years, Helena. 10 years of smiling at people I despised, of pretending to serve a king I hated." "For Varen?" Alara asked. "You betrayed your pack for him?" "I betrayed nothing." Cordelia's voice rose with fanatic intensity. "I work for the man who will restore balance to the territories. The man who will end Kaelin's unnatural reign and bring true order to the wolf packs. The man who should have ruled from the beginning." Her eyes blazed with devotion that bordered on madness. "You should be grateful, pure blood. You will play a crucial role in the new world we are building. Your blood will birth the true Alpha who will unite all packs under Varen's rule." Helena moved with the speed of desperation, a knife appearing in her hand as if from nowhere. She had hidden weapons throughout the room, Alara realized, had been preparing for exactly this kind of attack even while she pretended to be merely a concerned servant. The first Shadowmere wolf died before he could react, Helena's blade opening his throat in a spray of crimson. The second fell a heartbeat later, her knife finding the gap between his ribs and piercing his heart. But the others were ready now, surrounding her, forcing her back. Alara tried to rise, tried to help, but the awakening chose that moment to surge again, flooding her consciousness with visions that blurred the line between past and present. She screamed as memories and reality collided, as the battle in front of her merged with battles from centuries past, as she lost track of which wounds were new and which were ancient history. Through the chaos, she heard Helena cry out in pain. Through the bond, she felt Kaelin fighting somewhere in the castle, felt his fury and fear, felt him struggling to reach her even as enemies blocked his path. And then a new presence entered the room, and even in her fractured state, Alara recognized it. Lord Varen Ashford. He was not what she had expected. The memories she had inherited painted him as a monster, a villain, the architect of 2 centuries of conflict. The name Varen had been spoken in whispers throughout the castle, always accompanied by fear and hatred. He was the enemy, the destroyer, the man who had turned grief into a weapon and wielded it against everyone in his path. But the man who stood before her now looked nothing like a monster. He looked tired. He looked old. He looked like a man who had carried a burden for too long and forgotten how to set it down. His face bore the marks of someone who had stopped sleeping properly decades ago, and his posture, despite its military precision, held an exhaustion that no amount of rest could cure. His hair was silver, unmarked by the black that had once dominated it. His face bore the lines of grief that only immortals could accumulate, centuries of loss etched into his features. And his eyes, the same amber gold that marked all powerful alphas, held something that looked almost like sorrow. Not the fresh grief of new loss, but the deep, settled sadness of someone who had been mourning for so long that it had become part of who they were. "Leave us," he said to Cordelia, and his voice was quiet, controlled, carrying the weight of authority that expected obedience without demanding it. It was the voice of a man who had commanded armies, who had led his pack through wars and disasters, who had shouldered responsibilities that would have crushed lesser men. "My lord, she is dangerous. The awakening makes her unpredictable. She could—" "I said leave us." This time the command was sharper, and Cordelia flinched before gathering her wolves and withdrawing. Whatever devotion she felt for Varen, it did not extend to defying his direct orders. The surviving wolves carried their fallen comrades as they left, and the door closed behind them with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Helena lay on the floor, bleeding from multiple wounds, unconscious but still breathing. Her chest rose and fell with the shallow rhythm of someone who had pushed themselves beyond their limits. Alara wanted to go to her, wanted to check her injuries, but she could not move. The awakening held her in place, and Varen stood between her and her mother. Varen crossed the room slowly, his movements careful, almost gentle. He stepped around Helena's prone form without looking at it, his attention focused entirely on Alara. When he stopped at the edge of her bed and looked down at her, his expression was unreadable, a mixture of emotions too complex to separate. "You look like her," he said softly. "My sister, Serena. You have the same eyes, the same stubbornness in the set of your jaw, the same fire that refuses to be extinguished no matter how hard the world tries." His voice cracked slightly on his sister's name, 2 centuries of grief compressed into 2 syllables. "She would have liked you, I think. She always had a fondness for survivors." Alara forced the visions back through sheer will, clinging to the present, to the danger before her. The awakening still pulled at her consciousness, still demanded attention, but she refused to let it take her now. Not with Varen standing over her, not with everything hanging in the balance. "What do you want?" "What I have always wanted. Justice, truth, revenge for the woman I loved more than life itself." Varen sat on the edge of the bed, and the gesture was so unexpected, so human, that Alara felt her certainties begin to waver. This was not the behavior of a conqueror claiming his prize. This was an old man seeking something he had lost long ago. "Do you know what Kaelin Ironheart did to my sister? He killed her, to end her suffering. She was... Is that what he told you?" Varen's laugh was bitter, hollow, the sound of someone who had heard the same lies repeated so many times that they had lost all power to wound. "That she was a monster? That he had no choice? Did he tell you that she begged for death? That she was grateful when he crushed the life from her body?" Alara said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. "Lies." The word cracked like a whip. "All of it. Lies told by a murderer to justify his crime. I was there that night, pure blood. I saw what he did with my own eyes." Serena was not a monster. She was not suffering. She was investigating a secret that Kaelin did not want revealed, and when she got too close to the truth, he silenced her the way kings have always silenced those who threaten their power. He murdered my sister, the only family I had left in the world, and then he had the audacity to claim it was mercy. The awakening stirred inside Alara, and she felt the memories shifting, rearranging themselves, preparing to show her something important. But Varen's words had planted doubt, and doubt made the visions harder to interpret. "What secret?" she asked. "What was Serena investigating?" "The true nature of the pure blood prophecy. The reason your kind has been hunted and controlled for 500 years. Varen leaned closer, and in his eyes she saw the fire of conviction that had sustained him for 2 centuries. "Your bloodline is not just valuable for breeding true alphas. Your bloodline is the key to power that could remake the world. And Kaelin has been using that power secretly for 300 years. Every alpha king before him did the same. They keep the purebloods hidden, controlled, enslaved, using your abilities to maintain their thrones while telling the world you are merely rare and precious." The accusation struck at everything Alara had believed. Kaelin, who had been so kind, so patient, so willing to give her choices. Was it possible that his gentleness was merely another form of manipulation? But even as doubt crept in, the mate bond burned in her chest, golden and warm and impossible to fake. Whatever else might be lies, whatever secrets the past might hold, the connection between her and Kaelin was real. She had felt his heart through that bond, had seen his pain and his hope and his desperate desire to be worthy of her trust. A man like that could not be the monster Varen described. Could he? "You do not believe me," Varen observed, watching her face. "I understand. He has had months to earn your trust, to make you love him. But the truth has a way of surfacing, especially during the awakening. Before this is over, you will see for yourself what kind of man Kaelin Ironheart truly is." He stood, brushing off his robes. "I am not going to hurt you, Alara. Despite what you have been told, I am not your enemy. I am simply a man who has waited 200 years for justice, and I will not be denied now that it is finally within reach." "And if I refuse to help you? If I choose Kaelin over your revenge?" Varen's smile was sad, almost gentle. "Then I will show you the truth whether you want to see it or not. And once you have seen it, once you understand what he really is, you will make a different choice." He left without waiting for a response, and Alara was alone with her doubts and the unconscious form of her mother. The awakening surged again, and this time she did not fight it. She let the memories take her, let them carry her toward the truth that both men claimed to possess. She found herself in a memory that was not her own, seeing through eyes that had been closed for 200 years. Serena Ashford stood in a hidden chamber beneath the Northern Frost Castle, surrounded by books and scrolls that predated the wolf packs themselves. Her autumn-colored hair was bound back from her face, and her expression was one of intense concentration as she read from an ancient text. "The pure bloodline carries within it the essence of the first wolf," she murmured, tracing the words with her finger. "Not merely the ability to birth true alphas, but the power to transfer life force, to heal wounds that would kill ordinary wolves, to extend life far beyond its natural span." She looked up, and Alara gasped as she recognized the expression on Serena's face. Not fear, not anger, understanding. "That is how he has lived so long," Serena whispered to herself. "That is why he searches for purebloods so desperately, not to create true alphas, to steal their power for himself." The memory shifted, compressing time, and Alara watched Serena confront not Kaelin, but someone else entirely. An older man, his face bearing the features that Serena would one day pass to her brother, their father, the previous Alpha King of Shadowmere. "You knew," Serena accused. "You knew what was happening to the purebloods, and you did nothing." "I did what was necessary for our pack's survival." Her father's voice was cold, unapologetic. "The Northern Frost Kings have been draining purebloods for centuries. It is how they maintain their power. If we revealed the truth, they would destroy us. So instead you hunt them, use them, sell them to Kaelin like cattle?" "I protect our people. Something you would understand if you were not so blinded by sentiment." Her father's eyes narrowed. "You will forget what you learned here. You will go back to Kaelin, keep playing the devoted mate, and you will tell no one what you have discovered." "I will not. I will tell everyone. I will—" The memory fractured, pieces missing, and Alara struggled to follow the thread. She saw Serena running through corridors, saw her sending messages to allies who might help expose the truth, saw her growing increasingly desperate as she realized how deep the conspiracy went. And then she saw the night everything changed. Serena stood in Kaelin's chambers, but she was not confronting him. She was pleading with him. "They are coming for me," she said, and her voice trembled with fear. "My father has discovered what I learned. He has sent assassins, and there is something else, something worse. Tell me." Kaelin's voice was raw with emotion, his face a mask of anguish. "Whatever it is, we will face it together. There is a curse, an ancient binding placed on the pure bloodline by the first kings who sought to control them. Any pure blood who threatens to expose the truth is marked for destruction, not just death, transformation. The curse twists them into monsters, mindless beasts that can only be stopped by their mate." Kaelin finished, and the horror in his voice was unmistakable. "I know. I found the records last month. I have been trying to find a way to break it." "There is no way to break it, but there is a way to redirect it." Serena took his hands, and her grip was fierce despite her fear. "If I absorb the curse willingly, if I take it into myself before it can transform me against my will, I can control what happens next. I can choose how it ends." "No." The word was absolute, desperate. "I will not let you sacrifice yourself." "It is not a sacrifice if it saves the people I love." Serena's eyes glistened with tears, but her voice was steady. "The curse would spread to Varen if I die naturally. He would become the monster, and he does not have a mate to end his suffering. But if I take it willingly, if I let it transform me and then die by your hand, the curse ends with me. My brother lives, you live, and perhaps someday someone will find a way to free the purebloods entirely." The memory wavered, and Alara found herself pulled deeper, past the arguments and the tears and the desperate attempts to find another way. She saw the final night, saw Serena standing in a moonlit clearing, her body already beginning to change, her human form dissolving into something terrible. But her eyes remained the same, filled with love and trust and a courage that took Alara's breath away. "Remember me as I was," Serena said, and her voice was distorted but still recognizable. "Remember that I chose this, that I loved you enough to die so that others might live." She saw Kaelin step forward, saw the tears streaming down his face, saw his hands wrap around the throat of the monster that his mate had become. And she felt his heart break as he fulfilled the terrible promise she had extracted from him. But that was not the end of the memory. As Serena's body went still, as the light faded from her eyes, Alara saw something that neither Kaelin nor Varen had witnessed. A shimmer of golden light passing from Serena's body into the earth itself. And with that gift, a message for all future purebloods. Find the truth. Serena's voice echoed through time and memory. Break the cycle. Free them all. Alara gasped back to consciousness, the vision releasing her like a wave retreating from the shore. She lay in her bed, alone except for Helena's unconscious form, her mind reeling with the implications of what she had seen. The weight of 500 years of accumulated memory pressed down on her, but this newest revelation burned brighter than all the rest. The truth was more complicated than either man had known. Serena had not been murdered. She had not been silenced to protect a secret. She had sacrificed herself willingly to save the two men she loved most. The curse that threatened to transform her had been an ancient trap, laid by the first kings to control the pure bloodline. Varen was not wrong about the injustice. There had been exploitation, there had been slavery for centuries, but he was utterly wrong about Kaelin's role in it. Kaelin had not been the oppressor. He had been trying to break the cycle, trying to find a way to free Serena from the curse, trying to save the woman he loved even as she prepared to sacrifice herself. And Kaelin had carried the guilt of killing his mate for 200 years, never knowing that she had chosen her fate, never understanding that her death had been an act of love rather than tragedy. He had lived with the belief that he had murdered an innocent woman, that his hands were stained with the blood of someone who had trusted him completely. That guilt had shaped everything he had done since, every choice he had made, every wall he had built around his heart. Through the mate bond, Alara felt Kaelin still fighting, still struggling to reach her. She felt his exhaustion and his terror and his desperate determination to protect her, even if it cost him his life. He was wounded now, she could sense, bleeding from cuts that would have killed an ordinary wolf. But he kept fighting, kept pushing forward, driven by a love that refused to accept defeat. He deserved to know the truth. They both did. But first, she had to survive. And then she had to find a way to make Varen understand what had really happened 2 centuries ago. Helena stirred on the floor, groaning as consciousness returned. Blood matted her gray hair, and her movements were slow and pained, but her eyes were alert when they found Alara's face. She tried to rise, failed, and settled for propping herself against the wall near the bed. "Varen?" Helena gasped, her voice rough with pain. "He was here, he left. He wants me to see the truth through the awakening. He thinks it will turn me against Kaelin, will make me hate the man I have come to love." Alara forced herself to sit up, fighting through the weakness that still plagued her body. Every muscle ached, every breath was an effort, but she refused to remain helpless any longer. "But he does not know what I have already seen." "What did you see?" Alara told her. "Everything. The conspiracy and the curse and Serena's sacrifice and the message embedded in the pure blood essence." She told her mother about Serena's choice, about the love that had driven her to absorb a curse that would have destroyed her brother, about the final moments when she had asked Kaelin to end her suffering, not because she was a monster, but because she knew the curse would spread if she did not die. By the time she finished, Helena was weeping silently, her weathered face wet with tears. She had known Serena, Alara realized. They had been comrades once, before Helena fled Shadowmere with her unborn child. She had known the woman whose death had shaped 2 centuries of history. "That poor girl," Helena whispered, her voice thick with grief. "She died alone with her secret. She took the truth to her grave because she thought it would protect the people she loved. And the 2 men who loved her have been destroying each other ever since, fighting a war based on misunderstanding and pain. It does not have to continue." Alara reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it with what little strength she had left. "If I can show Varen what I saw, if I can make him understand what Serena truly did, maybe we can end this. Maybe the cycle can finally be broken. Maybe 2 centuries of hatred can give way to something better." "Varen will not believe you. He has hated Kaelin for too long. He has built his entire identity around that hatred, has used it to justify every terrible thing he has done. The truth would destroy the foundation of his entire existence. Then I will have to be very convincing." Alara pulled herself to her feet, swaying but determined. The room spun around her, and for a moment she thought she might fall, but she locked her knees and forced herself to remain standing. "But first, I need to find Kaelin. He is still fighting, still bleeding, still thinking that Serena died because of something he did wrong. He has carried that guilt for 200 years, Mother. He deserves to know the truth. He deserves to be free. Helena rose as well, her warrior training overriding her injuries. You can barely stand. The awakening is not complete. If you push yourself too hard, then I push too hard. I have spent my entire life being careful, being safe, letting others make choices for me. Elara straightened her spine and met her mother's eyes. No more. I know who I am now. I know what I am meant to do, and I will not hide in this room while the man I love fights alone. She moved toward the door, and Helena did not try to stop her. Instead, the older woman fell into step beside her, a knife appearing in her hand as if by magic. If we are doing this, Helena said, we are doing it together. Mother and daughter stepped into the corridor, into the chaos of battle, into the fire and shadow that would determine the fate of everyone they loved. Somewhere in the castle, Kaelin fought against overwhelming odds, his strength failing, his hope fading. And somewhere else, Lord Varen prepared his final move, certain that truth would be his ultimate weapon. Neither man knew that the truth was already on its way, carried by a pureblood who had learned that love was stronger than any curse, and that sacrifice could echo through centuries. The end was coming, but first there would be blood. The corridors of Frosthold Castle had become a labyrinth of blood and shadow. Elara moved through them with Helena at her side, stepping over bodies that wore the colors of both Northern Frost and Shadowmere. The battle had swept through every level of the ancient stronghold, leaving destruction in its wake that would take years to repair. Tapestries that had hung for centuries lay torn and burning on the floor, their intricate patterns depicting the history of the wolf packs reduced to ash and memory. Statues of long-dead kings had been toppled from their pedestals, their stone faces staring up at ceilings blackened by smoke, as if asking how their descendants could have let things fall so far. The sounds of combat echoed from distant chambers, screams and howls and the clash of steel against claw. The smell of blood was everywhere, thick and copper-sharp, mixing with the smoke to create an atmosphere that seemed to press against Alara's skin like a physical weight. Every breath was an effort. Every step was a battle against the weakness that still plagued her body from the incomplete awakening. She had pushed herself too hard, too fast. The visions still flickered at the edges of her consciousness, demanding attention she could not spare. Her legs trembled with each stride, and more than once she had to catch herself against the wall to keep from falling. But she could not stop. She would not stop. Not while Kaelin was still fighting. Not while she could still feel his heart beating through the bond that connected them. Through the mate bond, Elara could feel Kaelin. He was alive, but barely. Each beat of his heart sent a pulse of pain through their connection, a reminder that the man she loved was fighting for his life somewhere in this chaos. She could feel his exhaustion, his determination, his stubborn refusal to surrender, even as his strength failed him. The bond between them flickered like a candle flame in a hurricane, guttering toward darkness with each passing moment. She could sense his location now, a beacon of fading golden light, drawing her forward through the maze of corridors and chambers. He was in the great hall, she realized, surrounded by enemies, fighting alone because he had sent his guards to protect the civilians in the lower levels. That was so like him, always putting others first, always sacrificing himself for those he had sworn to protect. Even now, even facing death, he thought only of his people. Helena moved with the efficiency of a warrior who had never truly forgotten her training. Despite her injuries, despite the blood that still seeped from wounds that should have kept her bedridden, she cleared a path through the scattered fighting with deadly precision. The knife in her hand found throats and hearts with an accuracy that spoke of decades of practice, each strike economical, each movement purposeful. This was the woman who had killed 12 Shadowmere wolves to protect her unborn daughter. This was the warrior who had hidden beneath the mask of a servant for 23 years. Watching her mother fight, Elara understood something she had not fully grasped before. Helena had not simply survived the years since fleeing Shadowmere. She had been preparing. Every day spent in the castle, every hour of service to a household that did not know her true identity, she had been waiting for the moment when she would need to fight again. Waiting for the moment when her daughter would need protection. That moment had come. "He is in the Great Hall!" Elara gasped, clutching the wall as another wave of the awakening threatened to pull her under. The visions had not stopped, even now, even in the midst of battle. They flickered at the edges of her consciousness, like flames licking at dry wood, demanding attention she could not spare. I can feel him. He is surrounded. He is dying. Then we move faster. Helena grabbed her arm and pulled her forward, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman who had lost so much blood. Whatever happens, you reach him. You tell him the truth. You give him the strength to survive. Do you understand? What about you? Helena's smile was fierce and sad and proud all at once, the expression of a mother who had finally found her purpose after decades of searching. I have spent 23 years looking for you. I have spent 23 years living with the guilt of leaving you, of wondering if you were alive, of praying to gods I did not believe in that you had found safety somewhere. If I die today keeping you safe, I will die knowing that I finally did something right. That is more than I ever dared to hope for. You are not dying today, Alara said fiercely. Neither of us is dying today. We have too much lost time to make up for. Helena's eyes glistened, but her smile only widened. Then let us make sure of that, together. They reached the entrance to the great hall, just as the fighting inside reached its crescendo. The hall was vast, built to hold hundreds for feasts and celebrations, its vaulted ceiling soaring high above a floor of polished stone that had witnessed coronations and weddings and treaties for over 1,000 years. Crystal chandeliers that had once sparkled with candlelight now hung broken and dark, their fragments scattered across the floor like fallen stars. The great windows that lined the eastern wall had been shattered, letting in gusts of cold wind that carried the smell of snow and death. Now it had become an arena of death. Northern frost wolves fought in desperate clusters against Shadowmere attackers who outnumbered them 3-1. The floor was slick with blood, treacherous underfoot, reflecting the torchlight in dark pools that spread wider with each passing moment. The air was thick with the sounds of combat and the screams of the dying, a symphony of violence that would haunt the survivors for years to come. And at the center of it all stood Kalen. The Alpha King had shifted into his hybrid form, the massive half-wolf shape that only the most powerful of their kind could achieve. He towered over the battlefield at nearly 8 feet tall, his black fur matted with blood, both his own and his enemies', his amber eyes blazing with a fury that had sustained him through hours of fighting. The muscles beneath his fur rippled with each movement, but Alara could see the tremor in his limbs, the way he favored his left side where a deep wound had opened across his ribs. Even wounded, even exhausted, he was magnificent. He fought with the skill of 3 centuries of experience, each strike precise, each defense perfectly timed. But skill alone could not overcome the numbers arrayed against him. For every enemy he cut down, 2 more seemed to take their place. 5 Shadowmere alphas circled him like wolves around a wounded elk, each one fresh where he was exhausted, each one whole where he was wounded. They were elite warriors, the best that Varen had to offer, and they had been waiting for exactly this moment, waiting for the Alpha King's strength to fail so they could move in for the kill. He was going to die. Alara could see it with terrible clarity, could feel it through the bond that connected them. He had nothing left to give, no reserves of strength remaining, no hidden wells of power to draw upon. The mate bond between them flickered like a candle in a storm, guttering toward darkness, and when that light finally went out, she knew she would lose him forever. Something inside her broke open. The awakening had been building toward this moment, she realized with sudden, crystalline certainty. 500 years of accumulated power, 500 years of pure blood essence passed from mother to daughter through countless generations, had been waiting for the instant when she would need it most. It surged through her now, not as visions or memories, but as raw primal force that seemed to bypass her mind entirely and flow directly into her soul. She understood in that moment what the purebloods truly were. Not breeding stock for ambitious kings, not tools to be used and discarded. They were the guardians of their kind, the healers, the protectors. They carried within them the accumulated wisdom and power of 500 years, and that power had a purpose beyond prophecy. It was meant to save those they loved. Her body began to glow. Silver light poured from her skin, so bright that the fighters nearest to her stumbled back in shock. The light spread outward in waves, washing over the battlefield, and where it touched the Shadowmere wolves, they screamed and fell back as if burned. Where it touched the Northern Frost defenders, their wounds began to close, their strength began to return. Alara walked into the great hall, and the battle parted around her like water around a stone. She did not understand what was happening to her. She only knew that the power flowing through her veins was ancient and terrible and absolutely necessary. The pure bloodline had been created for this, she realized, not to birth true alphas, not to be breeding stock for ambitious kings. They had been created as guardians, as healers, as the last defense against the darkness that threatened to consume their kind. For 5 centuries, that purpose had been forgotten. For 5 centuries, the purebloods had been enslaved and exploited by those who feared what they might become. But Alara was the last of her line, and she would not be enslaved any longer. Kaelin turned toward her, his amber eyes widening with shock and something that might have been awe. The 5 Shadowmere alphas turned as well, their predatory focus shifting from their wounded prey to this new threat. One of them charged. Alara did not think. She simply raised her hand, and silver fire erupted from her palm, striking the alpha mid-leap and hurling him across the hall. He crashed into the far wall with a sickening crunch and did not rise. The other 4 hesitated. They were killers, trained from birth to show no mercy and feel no fear. But they had never faced anything like the creature standing before them now. This was not an Omega. This was not prey. This was something older and more dangerous than anything they had been taught to fight. "Leave," Alara said, and her voice carried the weight of centuries. "Leave this place. Leave this kingdom. Tell your master that the pure blood stands with Northern Frost. Tell him that if he wants war, he will face me." 3 of the alphas fled, their courage finally breaking in the face of power they could not comprehend. The 4th, either braver or more foolish than his companions, lunged toward her with claws extended, a snarl of defiance on his lips. Helena intercepted him. Mother and attacker collided in a tangle of limbs and blades, rolling across the blood-slicked floor in a struggle that lasted only seconds. When they came apart, Helena was on her knees, gasping. A fresh wound opened across her chest. The alpha was dead, Helena's knife buried to the hilt in his throat, his eyes still wide with the surprise of finding death where he had expected victory. "Mother!" Alara rushed to Helena's side, the silver glow around her intensifying as she pressed her hands to the wound. The power that had struck down enemies could also heal, she discovered. It flowed from her into Helena, warm and golden, knitting torn flesh, replacing lost blood, pulling the older woman back from the edge of death. Helena's eyes fluttered open, filled with wonder. "What are you?" "I am your daughter," Alara answered, her voice thick with emotion. "I am exactly what you raised me to be. I am exactly what you sacrificed everything to protect." Across the hall, Kaelin fell to his knees. His hybrid form dissolved, leaving only the man, broken and bleeding and barely conscious. The mate bond screamed with his pain, with his desperate need, with his absolute certainty that he was about to die. Alara left Helena in the care of Northern Frost soldiers who had rushed to their queen and ran to Kaelin's side. She caught him as he collapsed, cradling his head in her lap, her silver glow washing over him in waves of healing light. The wounds on his body began to close, the color returning to his face, his breathing steadying from desperate gasps to something closer to normal. "Stay with me," she begged. "You cannot leave me now. Not when I finally found you. Not when we have finally found each other." His eyes opened, clouded with pain but still aware, still holding the fierce intelligence that had ruled a kingdom for 3 centuries. "Alara, you should not be here. The battle is over. We won." She pressed her forehead to his, letting the mate bond carry everything she felt, everything she had learned, everything she needed him to understand. "And I have something to tell you, something about Serena, something you need to hear." She showed him. Through the bond, she transmitted the memories she had inherited during the awakening. She showed him Serena's discovery of the curse, showed him her decision to sacrifice herself, showed him the final moments when his mate had chosen death, not because she was suffering, but because she loved him too much to let the curse spread to her brother. Serena had not been a pure blood. She had been an ordinary Omega who had stumbled upon ancient secrets while searching for a way to help those who were. The curse she discovered was meant to destroy anyone who threatened to expose the truth about the pure bloodline, a trap laid by ancient kings to protect their power. When it targeted her, She had a choice. Let it transform her into a monster that would eventually kill Varen, or absorb it willingly and ask Kaelin to end her suffering before it could spread. She had chosen sacrifice. She had chosen love. She had chosen to die so that those she loved could live. She showed him Serena's last thought, preserved in the pure blood essence for 200 years, waiting for someone to finally share it with the man who had blamed himself for so long. "I love you." Serena's voice echoed through the bond, clear and warm and absolutely certain. "I chose this. Never blame yourself for giving me what I asked. Never let guilt poison the life I died to preserve. Find happiness again, Kaelin. Find love again. That is all I ever wanted for you." Kaelin wept. In 3 centuries of a life, in 2 centuries of grief, he had never allowed himself to truly mourn. He had carried the weight of Serena's death like a stone around his neck, had punished himself with loneliness and isolation, had built walls around his heart that he believed could never be breached. Now those walls crumbled. He wept for the mate he had lost and the truth he had never known. He wept for the years of guilt that had been unnecessary, for the friendship with Varen that had been destroyed by misunderstanding, for the man he might have been if he had known sooner that Serena's death was not his fault. And he wept for Alara, the woman who had given him this gift, who had shown him that love could survive even the darkest of revelations. "Thank you," he managed, his voice broken. "Thank you for showing me." "There is more work to do," she said gently. "Varen needs to see this too. He has hated you for 200 years because he believed you murdered his sister. If he knows the truth, perhaps we can finally end this." They found Varen in the throne room. The Lord of Shadowmere stood before the great seat of northern frost, his silver hair disheveled and falling across his face, his armor dented and bloodied from the fighting he had led through the castle corridors. He had removed his helmet, and without it, he looked older than Alara had expected. The lines on his face told the story of 200 years of hatred, of sleepless nights spent planning revenge, of days filled with nothing but the burning need to make Kaelin pay for what he had done. He had come here for victory, for the culmination of 2 centuries of planning and hatred and dreams of revenge. He had envisioned this moment countless times over the decades, imagining himself standing triumphant in the seat of his enemy, finally having achieved the justice his sister deserved. In his mind, this throne room would be the place where he finally found peace, where the ghost of Serena could finally rest. Instead, he had found defeat. His forces were broken, scattered through the castle in isolated pockets that were being systematically eliminated. His most trusted warriors were dead or fled. His dreams of revenge were crumbling around him like sandcastles before an incoming tide. Everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed, everything he had become, it had all been for nothing. When Alara entered with Kaelin leaning on her shoulder, Varen turned to face them with the expression of a man who had nothing left to lose. His amber eyes held no defiance. There was only emptiness there, the hollow gaze of someone who had poured everything into a single purpose and watched it slip away. "So this is how it ends," he said, and his voice was hollow, emptied of everything except exhaustion. The great Alpha King, saved by his Omega, the mighty Kaelin Ironheart, reduced to leaning on the shoulder of the woman he claimed to protect. He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was the laugh of a man who had finally realized that the joke had been on him all along. "This is not how it ends," Alara answered, her voice steady despite the weariness that pulled at every fiber of her being. "This is how it begins. I have something to show you, Varen. Something about Serena that will change everything you believe." Varen's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What could you possibly show me? What could you possibly know about my sister that I do not already know? I know how she died. I know why she died. I know the truth that has been hidden from you for 200 years. Alara stepped forward, releasing Kaelin to stand on his own. The Alpha King swayed slightly but remained upright, his eyes fixed on the man who had been his enemy for so long. The truth that the curse wanted to keep buried, the truth that would have set you both free if you had only known. "Lies," Varen spat. "More lies to protect a murderer." "Not lies. Memories. The memories of a pure blood who saw everything that happened, who preserved the truth in case someone would eventually need to know it." Alara walked toward him slowly, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Your sister saved my bloodline that night, Varen. She gave her life to protect not just you and Kaelin, but every pure blood who would come after, and she left a message for you, a message that has waited 200 years to be delivered." She reached out and touched Varen's face. The silver glow that surrounded her flared bright, and the connection between them opened like a door. Through that door, she poured the memories she had inherited. She showed Varen everything she had shown Kaelin, but she added something more. She showed him the fragments of Serena's earlier life that the awakening had preserved, the love Serena had felt for her brother, the conversations they had shared, the laughter and the arguments, and the countless small moments that had made them family. She showed him Serena as a child, following her older brother through the forests of Shadowmere, hero worship shining in her young eyes. She showed him Serena as a young woman, confiding her hopes and fears to the brother she trusted above all others. She showed him the last time they had spoken before the curse took hold, Serena's final embrace, her whispered words of love that Varen had carried with him through 2 centuries of grief. And she showed him Serena's final thought about Varen specifically, the words that had been waiting 200 years to be heard. "My brother," Serena's voice whispered through the connection, warm and loving and achingly sad. "My stubborn, wonderful, impossible brother. Do not hate Kaelin for what he does tonight. He is giving me peace. He is setting me free. If you must hate someone, hate the curse that forced this choice. Hate the ancient kings who created it. But do not hate the man I love for doing what I asked him to do. Do not let my death poison your heart. Live, Varen. Live and love and find happiness. That is the only memorial I want. That is the only way my sacrifice will have meaning." Varen staggered backward, breaking the connection. His face had gone pale, his eyes wide with shock and dawning horror. He stumbled against the steps leading to the throne and sat down heavily, as if his legs could no longer support him. "No," he breathed. "No, that cannot be true. I was there. I saw what happened. I saw him kill her with his bare hands." "You saw what the curse wanted you to see," Alara said gently. "You saw a monster and a murderer because that was how the curse protected itself. It needed someone to carry on the cycle of hatred. It needed someone to ensure that the truth about the purebloods remained hidden. And it chose you, Varen. It used your love for your sister as a weapon." 200 years, Varen's voice cracked, breaking on the words like waves on rocks. 200 years I have hated him. 200 years I have plotted his destruction. I have killed hundreds of people. I have destroyed families. I have burned villages and started wars. And it was all based on a lie I told myself because I could not bear the alternative. He looked up at Kaelin, and for the first time there was no hatred in his eyes. Only grief. Only the terrible weight of realization. "She chose it," Varen whispered. "She chose to die, and she asked you to be the one to do it." Kaelin stepped forward, his own face wet with tears he no longer tried to hide. "She loved you, Varen. More than she loved me, I think. Her last thought was of you. Her last wish was for your happiness. Everything she did that night was to protect you from the curse that would have destroyed you both." Varen fell to his knees. The Lord of Shadowmere, the architect of 2 centuries of conflict, knelt on the cold stone floor and wept like a child who had lost everything he believed in. The hatred that had sustained him for so long had been torn away, leaving only grief and guilt and the terrible weight of all the things he had done in pursuit of a vengeance that was never deserved. His shoulders shook with sobs that came from somewhere deep inside him, from a place he had kept locked away for 200 years. He wept for Serena, truly mourned her for the first time since her death. He wept for himself, for the man he had been before hatred consumed him, and he wept for all the people who had died because of his blind rage, all the innocent lives lost in a war that should never have been fought. Kaelin knelt beside him. The 2 men who had been enemies for longer than most wolves lived faced each other without weapons, without fury, without the barriers that had kept them apart for 200 years. In this moment, they were simply 2 people who had loved the same woman and lost her. 2 people who had been manipulated by forces beyond their understanding. 2 people who had finally found the truth, too late to undo the damage, but not too late to stop adding to it. "She loved you," Kaelin said quietly, his own voice rough with emotion. "Until the very end, she loved you more than anything. And I repaid that love with hatred." Varen's voice was barely a whisper. "All those people who died because of my revenge, it was all for nothing, worse than nothing. I dishonored her memory with every life I took in her name. Not for nothing." Elara knelt beside them both, forming a triangle of shared grief on the cold throne room floor. Serena wanted someone to break the cycle. She wanted someone to end the lies that had enslaved the purebloods for 5 centuries. Perhaps that is what both of you were meant to do together. Perhaps her sacrifice was not the end of a story, but the beginning of something better. Varen looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw the first faint stirring of hope. It was a fragile thing, barely visible beneath the layers of grief and guilt, but it was there. The seed of a new purpose, planted in the ashes of old hatred. "I have done terrible things," he said, "things that cannot be forgiven, things that can never be undone." "Forgiveness is not about deserving," Elara answered. "It is about choosing to let go of the pain. It is about deciding that the future matters more than the past. Serena made that choice 200 years ago. She chose to let go, to move forward, to trust that the people she loved would eventually find their way to the truth." Then Varen extended his hand toward Kaelin. "I cannot undo what I have done," he said. "But I can stop adding to the damage. I can disband Shadowmere's armies. I can return to my own territories and spend whatever years remain to me trying to repair what I have broken. I can try, however inadequately, to become the man my sister believed I could be." Kaelin took his hand. "Then we start again," the Alpha King said. "Not as enemies, not as friends perhaps, not yet, but as 2 men who owe a woman's memory better than endless war." They rose together, their hands still clasped, and in that gesture was the beginning of a peace that had been 200 years in the making. The hatred that had defined both their lives was not gone, could not be erased so easily. But it had been transformed into something else, into grief, into understanding, into the first tentative steps toward something that might, in time, become healing. The days that followed were filled with the work of healing. The wounded were tended by healers who worked through day and night, their supplies stretched thin by the sheer number of casualties. The dead were buried with honor, Shadowmere and Northern Frost alike, because Elara insisted that all who had fallen deserved respect regardless of which side they had fought on. The damage to Frosthold Castle was assessed, and the repairs begun, stonemasons and carpenters working alongside the remaining soldiers to restore what had been destroyed. Shadowmere forces withdrew from Northern Frost territory, escorted by guards who had orders to ensure safe passage rather than deliver punishment. It was an unusual gesture, one that many in the court questioned. But Kaelin understood what Elara was trying to accomplish. Every act of mercy, every gesture of goodwill was a brick in the foundation of the peace they were trying to build. Varen returned to his own lands, carrying the weight of his new knowledge and the burden of atonement that would occupy the rest of his long life. Before he left, he stood before the assembled court of Northern Frost and publicly apologized for his actions. He named the names of those he had killed, as many as he could remember, and pledged to send reparations to their families. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was a beginning. Lady Cordelia was brought before the Alpha King in chains, her beautiful face pale with fear, her elegant composure finally broken. She expected death. She expected torture. She expected the brutal vengeance that tradition demanded for traitors of her magnitude. Instead, she found Elara. "You will be exiled," the pureblood said, her silver eyes holding no hatred, only a tired sort of compassion. "Your titles will be stripped, your properties confiscated, your name struck from the rolls of nobility. You will leave Northern Frost and never return." Cordelia stared in disbelief. "That is all? After everything I did? After the lives I helped end? You acted out of love for a man who manipulated you. You believed lies that were fed to you for years. You did terrible things, and people died because of your choices." Elara's voice was steady, even gentle. "But you are not a monster. You are a woman who made wrong choices for what she believed were right reasons. Killing you will not bring back the dead. It will only add more blood to a cycle that has already consumed too many lives." She turned to Kaelin, who stood beside the throne with an expression of quiet approval. "This kingdom has been built on revenge and hatred for too long. If we want it to become something better, we have to start by showing that there is another way. We have to prove that mercy is not weakness, that forgiveness is not foolishness, that we can choose to be more than our enemies expect us to be." Cordelia was led away to begin her exile, and the court watched in silence. Some approved of the mercy, seeing it as a sign of the new direction their kingdom was taking. Others thought it weakness, a dangerous precedent that would invite further treachery. But all of them understood that something had fundamentally changed in Northern Frost. The pure-blood queen had brought a different kind of strength to the throne, and nothing would ever be quite the same. The mating ceremonies took place 1 month after the battle. It was not the grand spectacle that tradition demanded. Kaelin had lived through enough grand ceremonies to know that true meaning was found in small moments, not elaborate displays. The guests numbered fewer than 50, carefully chosen for their loyalty and their understanding that this was not a political event, but a personal one. Alara wore a dress of pale silver that matched her eyes, simple in cut, but beautiful in its simplicity. Her white hair was braided with small flowers that Helena had gathered from the castle gardens, the same gardens where Kaelin had first begun to fall in love with her months ago. She had never looked more beautiful, and when Kaelin saw her walking toward him through the chapel doors, he felt his heart skip in a way it had not done for 2 centuries. Kaelin wore the formal attire of an alpha king, but he had removed the crown. Tonight, he was not a ruler claiming a political alliance. He was a man pledging himself to the woman who had saved his life in every way that mattered. They stood before each other in the castle chapel, surrounded by candlelight and the scent of pine and winter roses. General Marcus stood as witness for Kaelin, the old warrior's eyes suspiciously bright as he watched his friend finally find the happiness he had long deserved. Helena stood as witness for Alara, tears streaming freely down her weathered face. The mate bond between Kaelin and Alara blazed with golden light that everyone present could see, a visible manifestation of the love that bound them together. When it came time for vows, Kaelin spoke first. "I have lived 312 years. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched friends grow old and die while I remained unchanged. I have carried burdens that would have crushed lesser men, and I have made mistakes that will haunt me for centuries to come." He took her hands in his amber eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "But in all those years, in all those experiences, I have never known anyone like you. You came to me broken and afraid, and you taught me that strength is not about hiding your wounds, but about healing them. You came to me as a stranger, and you became my home. You came to me in darkness, and you showed me how to find the light." His voice dropped, becoming intimate despite the witnesses. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to choose you every day, for as long as we both shall live. I promise to love you not because fate decreed it, but because you are worthy of love in ways that have nothing to do with destiny." Alara felt tears streaming down her face. "I spent 23 years believing I was worthless," she said. "I spent 23 years running from a world that told me I had no place in it. I built walls around my heart because I thought that was the only way to survive, and I told myself that I did not need anyone, that I was stronger alone." She squeezed his hands. "Then I met you. And you did not try to tear down my walls. You simply stood outside them, patient and kind, waiting for me to be ready. You gave me choices when everyone else gave me commands. You gave me respect when everyone else gave me contempt. You gave me a home when I had spent my entire life homeless." Her voice strengthened. "I do not love you because of the mate bond. I love you because of who you are. I love your patience and your wisdom and the way you look at me like I am the most precious thing in the world. I love the man you have become, and I am honored to become something new alongside you." The officiant pronounced them mated, and the bond between them sealed with a flare of golden light. When they kissed, it was not desperate passion. It was something deeper, a promise made flesh, a commitment that would last for centuries. 5 years passed. Northern Frost flourished under the combined rule of the Alpha King and his pure-blood queen. Old alliances were strengthened, new treaties signed, and the shadow of war that had hung over the territories for 5 centuries began to lift. Alara gave birth to their first child 2 years after the ceremony. They named him Garrett, and from the moment of his birth, there was something remarkable about him. His eyes shifted color with his moods, silver like his mother one moment, and amber like his father the next. Their daughter Luna followed 3 years later, born with her mother's white hair and her father's stubborn chin. Helena lived to see both grandchildren born, spending her final years teaching them the stories of their heritage. She died peacefully in her sleep on a winter night, surrounded by family, with a smile that suggested she had finally found peace. The pure bloods scattered across the territories were found, one by one. Alara sought them out and offered sanctuary. The pure bloodline began to rebuild itself for the first time in 500 years. Varen sent word regularly from Shadowmere, reports on his progress and letters that gradually shifted from formal correspondence to something approaching friendship. On the 5th anniversary of the battle, he traveled to Northern Frost to stand beside Kaelin at a memorial ceremony for all who had died. The two men who had been enemies for centuries stood shoulder to shoulder, united in grief and hope, living proof that even the deepest hatreds could be healed. On the night of their 5th anniversary, Kaelin led Alara to the watchtower where he had stood alone on the night they first met. The moon was full, casting silver light across the snow-covered mountains, and the wind carried the scent of pine and the promise of spring. "Do you remember what I told you once?" he asked, pulling her close against the cold. "About the dreams I had when I was young? About sailing across seas and climbing mountains no wolf had ever climbed? I remember. You said duty weighed more than dreams." He turned to face her, his amber eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I was wrong. I had not accepted anything. I had simply given up. I had stopped believing that life could be more than duty and sacrifice." He cupped her face in his hands. "You taught me to believe again, Alara. You taught me that 300 years of survival is not the same as 300 years of living." She leaned into his touch, feeling the mate bond pulse between them with steady warmth. "What do you believe now?" "I believe in watching our children grow, in growing old beside you, in seeing the world we have built together flourish." His voice dropped to a whisper. "And someday, when Garrett is old enough to rule, I believe in finally taking that journey I dreamed of, seeing the wonders I always wanted to discover, but this time, not alone." Alara smiled, and in that smile was everything she had never dared to hope for. Love, family, home, purpose. "Then we will see them together," she promised. "All the wonders, all the adventures, everything you dreamed, and everything we have not yet imagined." They stood together on the watchtower as the moon rose higher, two people who had found each other against impossible odds, who had fought through darkness to reach the light, who had learned that the greatest strength was not in standing alone, but in standing together. Below them, the castle slept peacefully, its corridors finally free of shadows. Beyond, the territories stretched out in a peace that had been centuries in the making. In her chambers, Luna dreamed the dreams of the innocent, while Garrett practiced the forms his father had taught him, already showing signs of the leader he would someday become. And somewhere, in this part of the world where spirits dwelt, two women watched over those they had loved. Serena, with her autumn-colored hair, smiled at the sight of her brother and her former mate, finally at peace. Helena, reunited at last with the man who had been her anchor, wept tears of joy for the daughter who had surpassed every hope she had ever held. The prophecy had spoken of destruction or unity. They had chosen unity, and that choice, made in love and sealed in sacrifice, would echo through generations to come, a testament to the simple truth that politics and history often forgot. Love was stronger than hatred. Forgiveness was stronger than revenge. And two people who chose each other, who trusted each other, who believed in each other even when all hope seemed lost, could change the world. The end.